Have you ever had this experience? You're working on a task, cruising through your day, then it happens. You run into that piece of code or some architecture resource that's in the way. It doesn't fit with what you're trying to do. It's hard to work with, it doesn't make sense to you, and you know if you don't do something about it now, it's going to rear its ugly head again in the future. What do? You'd like to change it, but you don't want to break anything. You look at the code to try and understand why it's there. There's no comments explaining it. You do a git blame to see if the file history reveals the intention. There's some comments like work in progress, get something working, fix typo. Not helpful. You're able to see what changed from the diff, but nothing explains why this thing is the way it is. From the git blame, you determine who worked on it. You try and set up a meeting to ask them, but they've left the company. This isn't looking good. You then try and find any docs in your internal knowledge system about it. Nothing comes up. Maybe there's a ticket about it in your project management system. You try and search, but you get hit with a wall of irrelevant results. Now what? You don't understand why this thing is here, and you can't find good information about it. According to software architect Michael Nygaard, you now have two choices. One, you can blindly accept this decision, or two, you can blindly change the decision. Either way, you're going in blind. Blindly changing the decision is the scariest of the two, at least in the short term, because it means something's probably going to break, which means users will be angry, which means your boss may be angry, and that's not an acceptable risk. So people gravitate towards taking the blue pill and blindly accept the decision. I've personally seen this happen thousands of times, and it's happening every day in code bases all over the world. What's scary about this is that these daily decisions are a major factor in code rot. If you're not familiar with that term, according to Wikipedia, code rot is the degradation, deterioration, or loss of the use or performance of software over time. When people are justifiably scared to change a troublesome piece of code or architecture, it stays there. Instead of cleaning out the disease, they incrementally build around it. They add layers of unnecessary complexity around this core issue to avoid changing it. They might be able to hide it, but the underlying issue still exists. It continues to fester and permeate throughout the system, causing a ripple effect. When this happens repeatedly, day after day, year after year, the codebase becomes so unmaintainable, so complex, so cumbersome, that no amount of hiring can save it. It collapses under its own weight, forcing you to start over, or worse, brings about the end of the organization. What can you do to avoid this terrible fate? Short answer, make sure anyone can understand the why of your decisions without you being present. Make sure everyone else can understand your rationale without you being there. When I say everyone else, this also includes your future self. Your future self may not remember why you did something without help. You need to make sure you can't forget. If other people need to understand it, make sure they can do it without scheduling a meeting with you. You might be on vacation, or parental leave, or be sick, or moved on to a new organization. If someone has to schedule a meeting with you to understand something, that's an inefficiency. It's going to interrupt both your current work stream, add coordination and scheduling costs, and also block the other person if they have to wait a while for your calendar to open up. You don't want to make yourself a bottleneck for information. This wastes yours and everyone else's time. To do this, to get yourself out of the way, you have to write stuff down. Specifically, you have to write down why you did something. You also have to write it down where people can find it. When you do this, you'll see major improvements in quality, efficiency, and scalability for both your project and your team. It's not free though, and there are some challenges. One of the challenges is that not everyone likes writing or is comfortable with it. It can feel akin to paperwork, which is a dirty word to many. It's just not as fun or sexy as writing the code itself. Many view it as not real work because it's not directly giving users value. Writing down why something was done is adding metadata to the code and is thus indirect value. Without deliberate attention, it will become an afterthought. Addressing this is primarily an issue of mindset and values. It's necessary for each individual to overcome this. It's especially necessary for it to happen at a team level. If team leaders aren't bought into the importance of it, it's going to be an uphill battle for the team to do it as well. Another challenge is knowing where to put this information so that it's relevant and discoverable. There are enough options for choosing where to write this down, and it can be hard to know which one to use under which circumstances. Let's examine some of these and get a better idea of how to make them work for us. I'll go over code comments, Git history, decision records, team docs, and project management tools. Your first line of defense are code comments. These are great because if done well, they can explain why code exists right there in the code itself. There's no need to go hunting other places because it's right there. You want to include a good amount of why into your code comments to maximize time saved and opportunity for people to discover why that code exists. Code comments, of course, have their problems, the biggest of which is that they can easily fall out of date without a lot of discipline. This is all the more reason to focus them on the why more than the what. The code itself can tell the what story pretty well on its own. The what is also going to change a lot more often than the why. Another issue to look out for is that code comments live next to one granular piece of a much bigger picture. There are often many code files that are all interconnected to one higher level decision. You can't feasibly duplicate a high level decision like that in all of the code files. What you can do is link your code comments to a decision record, which is a thing we're going to circle back to later. I mentioned the issue of code changing. This brings me to the next place we want to prioritize documenting our decisions, which is in our Git history. The Git history is nice because it also lives with the code and it follows the history of the code. It's already set up well to show us why changes were made. The problem I see with Git is that people don't leverage it enough for this purpose. They leave commit messages that are too sparse, that merely repeat what changed. I can look at the diff to see what changed. Tell me why instead. This again is a matter of mindset and values. The team needs to deliberately care for the history in order for it to live up to its potential. Another mistake is relying purely on Git for understanding the code base. While Git can potentially have much of the data about why things have evolved to their current state, it takes too much digging to find the answers you seek. This can be hard if your history is nice and linear, and even more so when you're using merge commits. Git acts as a log of the changes that have taken place, but we don't want to be too dependent on digging through that log, piecing things together to find answers. It just takes too long. Some may argue, AI tools will take care of this. I don't need to worry about commit messages anymore because AI can summarize that away. There is some truth to this. Finding good information is becoming easier with AI tools. It will become easier to ask a question of your Git history. AI will be able to infer things, but if you don't write down the why in your history, you'll be dependent on inference and much more subject to hallucinations. I would argue it's more important to include your rationale with AI, not less. This brings me to our next place for recording decisions, which are decision records. Decision records, sometimes called ADRs or architecture decision records, are a great way to record those high-level decisions that don't fit well in the code comments of one particular code file. Each decision record contains the context of the problem, the decision that was made, the status of that decision, alternatives considered, and the pros and cons of each alternative. You can write these in Markdown and place them in a decisions folder right there in your code base, so they too can be close to the code. You can reference them in your code comments and Git commits also so that you can make a clear association between the finer details and the bigger picture. You can also make a centralized decisions repo for decisions that cut across multiple projects and don't fit cleanly into any one code base. The biggest challenge with the decision records is just getting them made at all. It's hard enough to get people to record why they did something in a Git commit or a code comment, let alone a completely separate document. If these are left as an afterthought, it's unlikely they will ever happen. This is especially true when you're in a meeting-driven culture where most decisions are made orally via synchronous communication. In that context, writing the decision down is chronically going to be left as an afterthought as people run off to the next meeting before the decision gets documented. One way to offset this is that teams can make the document a part of the meeting. Put it in front of everyone, front and center, fill it out as part of the meeting. This way it's already done when the meeting ends. This takes intentionality, and the leader of the meeting really needs to be bought in. Alright, we've talked about code comments, Git commits, decision records. Where else is it beneficial to record why we did something? Another one is docs that live outside the code. I'm talking about wikis, design docs, runbooks, and the like. At this level, you are talking about cross-team concerns, people processes, guides for onboarding, etc. You want to include why in these documents as well, not just the how and what. Processes and ways of operating need to change over time, just like code does. If people can't remember why a process is the way it is, you end up with process rot and ineffective bureaucracy. It causes people to justify actions with, "This is how we've always done it," and then never make things better. The last place I'll go over that you can store the rationale for decisions is within your issue trackers or project management tools. A lot of these documents are created before code is even written or collaborated on with teams outside of engineering. It's important to understand why a feature or issue exists and how that connects to the code. These docs can be useful to link to from your other records, like commits or code comments, to give more context to a feature or bug. There's a lot of places to document, like we've gone over, and if you need to deprioritize one of them, I'd say you choose this one. While they provide useful context, project management tools often make it very hard to find stuff. They're also not very portable. Teams will switch which tool they use and poof, all that context is gone. It's usually also not controlled by the engineering team, which makes it hard to keep organized and makes it less useful for engineers who need to understand and make the decisions. The most important thing with all of this, if you're going to take away one thing, is that you need to be writing down why in as many places as possible. For the health and success of the system, make it as easy as possible for anyone to understand why a decision was made. Weave this into all of these different tools, make it as discoverable as possible without having to set up a meeting. I promise you will thank me and your past self later. Let me know in the code comments other tools or techniques you found useful for surfacing why decisions were made. Make sure and subscribe also so you can learn more software engineering principles and practices in any upcoming videos. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.